Hi everybody. You ready to get started? I'm Jodi Click. This is my first time doing a webinar, so I will try not to break the internet tonight while we do this. We'll talk about developing lifelong leisure skills for individuals with multiple disabilities. So I'm going to talk about activities for the classroom, but also at home across the age span. So we'll go ahead and get started. As you can see, our first slide talks about why leisure skills are so important. So when we think about where our individuals with multiple disabilities are going to go over time, they're going to be in a classroom. They're going to go to different places and outings where they're going to need to sit and be able to self-entertain. As adults, they may end up in group homes, they may not, but they'll have caregivers who are going to need breaks and they need to be able to do something besides just sit in possibly a wheelchair or other positioning device over time. So we want them to be able to entertain themselves and do things that they prefer, because quality of life is better when you enjoy things, when you're not just constantly being entertained and waiting for somebody else to do something with you. Many children who have multiple disabilities are not able to independently explore their environment, so they don't get to choose their own toys and activities, where other kids would maybe crawl over and they may choose to play with an outlet, which we don't want that, but they get to choose things. They have that cause and effect that they're learning. So many students with multiple disabilities don't have that ability. They have to interact with things that a caregiver decides they want to play with, the toys that are handed to them. I had a client a couple of years ago, for the first time she was in a wheelchair, or in a power wheelchair. She was in her late 40s, early 50s, and as soon as we put her in the chair, the first thing she did was drive the chair to behind her group home. She'd lived in that group home for over 10 years and never seen her backyard. There was nothing there, but it had never dawned on staff to just take her back there because she just didn't have that ability to go there on her own. So we relate that back to this, that they don't always have the ability to tell us what they want, what things they want to play with. So we want to give them lots of options and develop a repertoire of activities they can use over time. When we start early, we can build on those skills. So if you start in preschool, if you start when the child's 2, and start thinking long term, is this thing that they're playing with, what in that thing that they like can we do as an adult? What can this relate to? What is the interest level? Then you can build on those skills so that they have a greater repertoire of things they can do as an adult. So we'll go ahead and switch to the next one here. So adapting and modifying activities. A quote that we have is, individuals with multiple disabilities often have difficulty with leisure activities due to physical, cognitive, and sensory limitations. Adapting the activities and the materials provide those individuals with increased opportunities to participate. So just a little bit of adapting can sometimes make all the difference to be able to participate in an activity that all of their friends are doing. So there's 3 guidelines that were set up by Lehman and Schlein several years ago, but they're still appropriate. So they are to, one is to adapt enough to increase participation, success, and enjoyment, but only adapt when necessary. This is a big one that we have to consciously think about, especially in a special education classroom. Don't adapt something that doesn't need adapted. A lot of us are guilty of making something switch accessible because we think, oh, we should use switches with somebody, and they don't need to. If an individual can roll over and then flip a light switch, we don't need to make a light switch accessible. We don't need to adapt a game if they're able to do it with minimal accommodations or minimal adapting. View any change or adaptation to the activity or materials as temporary. So we want to work toward engagement in the original activity. So we adapt as minimally as possible, and then we slowly fade those as we can, so that the goal is that we can get them to do as close to what everyone else is doing as possible over time. And number 3, make adaptations on an individual basis, meeting the individual needs. Do not adapt an activity for an entire group if only one participant requires a change. And this can go both ways. We obviously want them to be able to participate equally with their peers, but we may be able to just adapt a little bit of the game so that they can participate without having to change everything for everybody else. So there's 5 considerations for adapting. Material adaptations means that we may be changing the materials. We may add a grip so it's something that's easier for them to hold or to pick up. If you've seen somebody bowling with a bowling ramp, that's adapting the materials so that they can still bowl in a regular game. We may make something texturized for a visual impairment. We may make the sound louder for someone with a hearing impairment. For procedural or rule adaptations, this is where maybe if you're playing baseball, they're allowed to stand closer. We may take out a few bases and they only have to run a certain amount of time. You may require fewer points to end the game, or you may take out a certain part of a rule that would make the game inaccessible, and it's just a minor change. For skill sequence adaptations, these are things like if you're going swimming, you may change into the swimsuit at home and not at the pool. So you've taken out just part of the skill and part of the sequence of the steps. You may not have the person shuffle cards on their turn around the board. They may not king a piece when they jump in checkers and get to the end because they can't pick up the checker and stack it. So you could just take that part out of the game and still have them win and still do it the rest of the game the same way. Okay? So what we want to look at is that we're looking for what the child likes about a preferred toy or activity. So as I start to go through some of the leisure activity ideas, our goal is to keep thinking, what do they like about the activity we're doing? So if they seem interested in it, then find other things that have those same characteristics. If you aren't sure what it is they like, if they just play with it, then find something that's similar but is missing one component and see if they like it just as much. So that might be the part that they like, or remove it from the activity that they're doing and see if they're still engaged. So that helps you identify if it's something they like about the way it lights up, if they like the sound, if they like anything visual about it, if they like how it feels. So as you remove the separate components one at a time, you can start to identify what it is about the toy or the activity that makes them interested. Okay? Many toys sometimes that we will play with maybe when they're 2 or 3 that may seem babyish, over time, a lot of times you can just spray paint those toys and you take away maybe the Barney picture on the side or the Sesame Street logo and then make it look more age appropriate and they still get the same input that they had before. Or you may find that it wasn't the baby part of the toy that they liked. It may have been the sound effects that you could get with something else or use an MP3 player. So those are things to keep in mind and constantly keep adding to those and try to keep things that their peers are doing, add a little bit of that in as they go to see what they're interested in over time. So leisure activity number 1 is watching TV. And my students' parents will tell you that I am anti-TV ever at school. I feel like staff shouldn't be doing that, but it is something that's a feasible leisure activity. When you think long term, we all go home, we may sit and we watch TV, we watch movies, and it's the same reasonable expectation for someone with multiple disabilities. But what happens though with them as an adult is that they're often sat in front of the TV. They don't get to pick what they're watching, or they may spend a lot of time there because staff are busy with other people, they needed a break. So we want watching TV to be something that is taught to them so that they learn all of the components. It shouldn't be a passive activity. It shouldn't be something where they're sitting and they may as well be staring at the wall because they're not engaged with what's happening. A big thing we want to do is remember to teach them things like how to turn the TV on, how to use the DVD player and turn it on, how to use the remote control. Even if they have multiple disabilities, there are adapted controls you can buy that can control those different things. Or a lot of times they could just push the power button on a remote control if you fastened it somewhere where they could reach it or where they could bump it with maybe their foot or their head or whatever part they have the best use of. So we don't want to, again, don't want to adapt if we don't need to. So you may just be able to teach them where to hit, or you may be able to put tape over all of the buttons except the one that they need so that it's easier for them to hit with an open fist or an open hand. So we want to think about sequencing the skill acquisition of ways to teach someone how to watch TV. So if we start out when they're watching maybe a preferred movie as a child, so when they're 2 or 3 years old and they're watching movies, have them hold the DVD case and look at the DVD case and then start to talk to them about what's going on that cover so that they begin to see that this DVD case relates to what I'm watching on TV. Talk about the show. So in their mind, they're starting to connect. We've got this visual thing, and this connects to this picture. And when they watch a different movie, you're having them hold a different case that goes with the other movie. Another thing is making comments about the scenes related to the cover picture. So if you're watching a movie and it's Big Bird is playing baseball, then you want to talk to them about, look at the cover of my movie. See how Big Bird's holding a baseball bat? That's because he's going to play baseball in this movie. And if on this cover he's bowling, so he's going to bowl in this movie. And so you want to say those things over and over. And then when that comes on in the movie, point out, look, this looks just like what's on the cover. So that they begin to have that relationship between something we're seeing visually as what is going to be on the TV. And then you will be able to use that as the way to make choices because it has to relate. They have to understand that this case is different from a different case, and so different things are going to happen on the TV when I do that. And that will help down the road when we're making choices, when we're using communication devices, because we have to be able to set up that this picture means something will happen. For some school activities of things that they can do is matching video scenes to the correct case. So you may record little parts of a movie, especially if you can find a part that they really enjoy, and record it onto an iPad or onto your computer, or just little snippets of it, and then have them match that to the correct case. You can do it by having them point, by having them pick it up if they're able to do that. You may have to put it into maybe an iPad app or something that they're moving around, but have them start matching those things so that when you're going to make choices later, they mean something to them. Over time, you want to see them be able to match free shots. So you would take free shots of part of the movie and then start to match that with the case. Don't take a shot of the exact same picture that's on there. Use something related so that they can start to see different parts of that movie still relate to this case. And these are also really great pre-literacy skills because a lot of these students can learn to read, and so we want to start with these things that mean something to them. Use those sight words. So if you've got a movie about baseball, you can start out with that baseball picture and have the word above it and have them match that shot so that they start to recognize the word as well. Then moving down to match the activity symbols to the case. So as you start to introduce maybe picture symbols or however you're going to use them, you're going to have them match that to the case. So if it's a movie about baseball, you're going to have a picture symbol about baseball and they match it to that. If it's a movie about going to the beach, then we start to match the picture symbol for the beach to the case. And then as you go on and the student starts to develop literacy skills, you could take off the picture and just leave the word beach and they match it to the correct case. So that we're working on that skill development with something they're interested in, but also something that gives them tools to make choices in the future. Okay? We also want to give multiple choices for viewing. A lot of times what happens is we find movies that somebody likes or we find a TV show they like, so we show them that over and over, and they still like it, but we don't provide more opportunities to go outside of that area. We may buy more and more Sesame Street videos and more whatever music video that they like. And we need to keep offering new things. Let them introduce things that are peer age group movies that they will be watching. Let them see those things and see if they also like those and branch out. Don't just stick to what we know they already like, but give them a way to tell you that they don't like it. And it can be as simple as pushing the DVD case off their wheelchair tray. Tell them if you don't like this and you want me to stop it, that you can yell. Have them push the button and turn off the TV if they don't like it, or using a communication device, picture symbols, whatever you need to use. But give them the option to always be able to tell you, I don't like this, I want to try something different. Okay. So the next one we want to look at is ways to adapt some card games. So using different adapters, I gave you a couple of links for different ones. One will sit on a wheelchair tray. One is a way to still hold it in the hand if you have use of hand. If someone has better use of one foot or the other, they may be able to use the second picture there to hold that case between their toes. You just have to be a little creative with those things. You can also copy cards or cut out cards onto foam craft paper to make them easier to handle or to lift. Make your own cards on tag board. And a lot of times the cards are very visually overstimulating because there's numbers, they're upside down at the bottom. So you may want to make your own and just put the number and the suit at the top and nothing else on the card to help them focus in on what they're supposed to. When you start out with card skills, we obviously want cards to be able to grow into something that they could use as an adult. So we may begin by matching colors, and they just have to match two colors together, or find all the cards of this color and start putting them together. Match them by numbers. Maybe put them in number order if they can start doing that, because that's going to be a skill you might need to play solitaire by yourself as an adult. Matching different symbols on the cards, matching different textures if you need to do that. And then start doing it as a matching game back and forth between another person so that they can start working on turn-taking skills. So that's where you do that kind of go fish game of, can you hand me the 3, or can you hand me a red card? Can you hand me the card that has the soft texture on it? So they learn how to interact with someone else playing with the game. Figure out different ways for them to pick up and put down the cards. They may have to just leave the cards maybe on the table and they slide it to the other person. If you're using the card holder, you're going to have to figure out ways that they're going to get it out and hand it. So talk through that with them, figure those different things out. You'll have to try lots of different things depending which part of their body or what use they have the best that they'll be able to control. One thing that's hard to do is shuffling cards, so they can always just sit it and stir it. You can stir with your feet, you can stir with your elbows, you can stir with your hands. You can also put them into a large Tupperware bowl put the lid on it and just shake it really good to let them do it. You can knock that off of the wheelchair tray and they'll shake them on the way down. So there's ways that they can shuffle the cards as well. The next one is flashlight games. Many of our individuals with multiple disabilities never really have the opportunity to sneak around in the dark. They don't get to hide under the covers with a flashlight and read after dark. They don't crawl out of their crib and crawl around the house or sneak out when their parents are asleep. Things that we don't really think about, they're missing out on as opportunities. And especially kids with multiple disabilities more than others, is that they're always somewhere where it's lit. Because when we go in the middle of the night and help them move somewhere, when you push them in their wheelchair, we always turn the light on so that we can see where we're lifting, where we're transferring to. So they really don't have a lot of opportunities except when they're in bed to be in the dark and to play in the dark. So flashlights can be very visually stimulating, even with kids with cortical visual impairment. They can be very entertaining. And just getting to play in the dark, turning the lights off in the classroom, turning the lights off at home, and just playing with flashlights is really fun for them. You can mount lights onto a wheelchair tray. You can mount them to an armrest or a table. The AbleNet gooseneck mount with the swivel plate is one I used to use in my classroom because it's easy to move the flashlight and they can control the swivel. And I just used a regular clamp to clamp it on there. Have them play with the light attached to a switch. You can use a battery interrupter to run the flashlight on a switch, and then you can use switch access wherever they're used to using it. Allow them to explore dark places by flashlight. So have the flashlight, if they're attached to their chair or wherever they are, and you push wherever they lead the flashlight. If they turn it, then you push their chair that direction and let them decide where to go. Another thing to do with putting this on there is it lets them learn to propel their own manual and power chairs. Going around in the dark is really motivating reason to push your chair when it's hard, or really motivating reason to work on learning how to steer your power chair because you can explore in the dark and see things. Playing light tag is really fun, and it's something they can do with their peers. All of their peers in the classroom can have flashlights, and they can mount theirs on the swivel thing and move it. They can tag each other. They can find each other. And another way to use them as a transition to communication is having them shine a light on something they want that's across the room, especially if they have something that maybe isn't on a communication device, and they say, this isn't here, I need another choice. Then we want them to have the ability to show us what it is that they want that's across the room. Or if they want to go somewhere, they can point the direction. Is it outside? Is it in the bathroom? So starting to be able to show you that I want something that's out of sight. This is that step between I know it's there and I can't see it. They can see it with the flashlight, but they're learning to communicate about something that isn't directly next to them that they can show. And many of these children don't have the ability to point and lead and grab your hand and take you to something. So this gives them a way to do that with a tool. So flashlights are always a hit in my classroom and playing in the dark. So leisure activity number 4 is dominoes. And dominoes can be really fun for our kids. And I was never a dominoes fan as a child. But when I started teaching and using them, my students have always loved them. They can just put them together anyway. Just letting them push them together and slide them around, the kids love doing that. You can put different textures on them and have them match the different textures. Match them by color, match them by shape. I've had one student that I used sound on because he was highly motivated. So I bought lots of Hallmark cards, and you can use the little sound button that's inside your Hallmark card. You'll have to have 2 of each card, and then have them match. So when they push the domino down, it activates the sound button. It'll play whatever song from whatever greeting card you bought. Then they have to find the domino that has the same song to play and then match those. You can use them on sticky side up contact paper. It's just fun to push things down on the sticky. All the kids like touching the sticky. Putting magnets on the back. That way they can slide them on a vertical magnetic board such as a dry erase board, or on a cookie sheet that you prop up. That will give them better access in front of them so they don't have to reach down on a flat surface. It also makes it a lot easier for kids that may have visual impairments to see or to access them if they're directly in front of them. You can also make your own dominoes out of different wood. You can make them out of cardboard. Cardboard that's made from just a regular box seems to be the easiest for people to pick up and grab because it's a little thicker than using like cardstock. Plastic, I've used bubble wrap cut into strips, and then we put stickers on the bubbles and they just match the stickers. And the kids loved playing with the bubble wrap, and then once they had to match and line them up, then they could pop the bubble wrap, so that one can make it a little more motivating. So leisure activity number 5 for reading. Obviously reading is a lifelong skill that we all have. So we want to give them these tools. We don't want to just hand board books or assume that because they can't turn pages well on their own, that that's not an option. And I know there's tons of options out there on the iPad, but I wanted to stay away from technology so much in this one and just give more hands-on things that will be available to everyone. So you can adapt any book by putting flattened toilet paper tubes. So just take the tube and you just squish it flat, step on it, smash it with your hands, and then put it between each page down into the binding, and it makes the pages stick apart, and it's easier to grab a hold of the page to turn it. So this works a lot better with younger kids' books because there aren't as many pages. Otherwise, if you get into a novel, you're going to need a lot of toilet paper tubes. But it gives them the ability to start turning pages on their own, which is a really important skill. And they can do it with a closed fist because they can get their hand under there to be able to turn that page. You can also take apart magazines and laminate the pages and then staple them back together like they were when you originally bought the magazine. But laminating the pages makes them last longer. It's helpful especially if they have limited mobility so that they may rip the pages when they try to do it. It makes it easier to turn them. I used to buy, when I taught high school students, I would buy all the prom magazines, laminate the pages and put them back together in my classroom. And then all the other students would come in and want to look at the prom magazines with them. And it gave them that opportunity to be with their peers. You can also bind a magazine with just a simple binding machine. Put it in a 3-ring binder because that makes it easier to turn the pages because they slide more easily. Build up your page edges with pieces of foam. Just even little foam stickers work. You can use little Band-Aids on the edge and make tabs so that they stick on both sides of the page to make it easier to grab a hold of. Clothespins work especially well with children's books where it's not as many pages, so you can make a line of clothespins down the side and they can grab the clothespin to flip the next page. I find that when you get more pages in the book, when you get up into those readers, it works better to use Band-Aids or different things where you can create a sticky side on both sides and create a little handle off the edge. Another thing with reading is teach students to use audiobooks. Begin right away when they're young because they have a multiple disability. It's not going to go away. They're not going to suddenly develop the ability to just pick up books and be able to read them and turn pages and do everything simply on their own. So audiobooks are always going to be a great option for them. It can be a way for them to access textbooks as they're in school. They can use an iPad, a Kindle, tape or CD player, an MP3 player, but teach them how to use those things from when they're young so that it's something we're building that skill all the way along. So if they're 4 years old and they already know how to access the book or how to pick it out, by the time we get to high school they're going to be able to do all kinds of things with their reading abilities. You're going to be able to start working on wearing headphones. Sometimes that's hard. You have to find different types of headphones that fit better. What works if they have maybe a head switch mounted on their chair. You have to make sure that headphones wouldn't impact those things. So the earlier we start, the easier it is to start adapting those things. Make sure that as you're doing the audiobooks and you go over time, that we try to, even if they're showing interest at a lower level, if it's someone with a more profound cognitive disability, we still want to introduce the peer reading levels. So if everybody's reading the latest vampire book, then get that audiobook and see if they're interested in it. See if they listen to it or if they immediately seem to take off the headphones or don't want to have a part of it. Because if they are interested and they do get something from it, then you've created more social opportunities for them to interact with their peers and have things to discuss with them. Even if they're using a communication device, they have things to start a conversation, ways to add more comments with their peers instead of just answering simple questions. So for the next one for board games, these can be fun. Once you start thinking outside the box with board games, it gets interesting because there's so many things you can do with them. So going back to my point of don't adapt unless you need to, a lot of times just by putting a board game maybe up on a vertical surface that makes it easier for them to see. You could put little tiny pieces of Velcro on the playing spot. So if you think of maybe Candyland or Chutes and Ladders, if you put a little tiny Velcro circle on each spot and Velcro pieces on the bottom of the game places, you can put them vertical or put them on a slanted board and be able to use it without having to do anything else to the game board. You can also use the original and cover it with contact paper, but put the edges of the contact paper so that it sticks it up to the vertical surface. So you're just using the contact paper basically as glue, but it's covering the whole entire surface. And that will hold it up there, but it gives them the original board, and it still looks the same through the clear contact paper. Another thing to do is put magnets on the back of the game pieces so they can stick to a vertical surface. So if you make color copies of your game board and then laminate it, you can hang it and then use the magnets to put them up there. Make your own magnetic surfaces. You can use dry erase boards, use chalkboards, use cookie sheets, whatever works to put up behind it so that you can use the magnet part of the game pieces. You can buy talking dice from the American Printing House for the blind. They have so many resources that adapt to games, but I also find that a lot of their things they have for visual impairments are also great for many of our individuals with multiple disabilities that don't have visual impairments. So if you've never checked out the APH website, I'll get to that again at the end, but I definitely recommend looking at some of the options they have for games. Another way for shaking the dice, because it's kind of hard to shake too and get them to land where you want and then be able to see them. So you can shake them by putting them in a Tupperware container and shake the container. If you use a clear container, then you can just flip it upside down and be able to see what the dice are from the bottom without having to take them out or open the lid. You can make your own switch adapted spinners. So if the game has a spinner that you need for taking turns, they have a switch adapted one. I also gave you a link for how to make your own out of a spin art toy. So there's lots of different ways that you can adapt those things, just thinking outside the box a little bit there. Okay, and the next one is puzzles. So you can put magnets on the back of pieces. Use magnetic spray paint to spray all the back of pieces. The spray paint's a lot faster. I will say that it doesn't stick super well. So if you've got someone that maybe can't get it all the way close to the magnetic surface to put the puzzle together, you may want to use Rust-Oleum. Has a magnetic primer that brushes on. So if you put the puzzle pieces out upside down, brush on the magnetic primer, the more coats you use of the paint, the greater the magnetic attraction will be. So it'll stick better. Krylon makes a spray paint that's pretty easy, and it works pretty well if you've got the ability to push it flat against the magnetic surface. So you can put your puzzles together on the vertical or slanted surface, and then they can see them better, they can reach them better, they can slide them around more easily. You want to make sure that, I see cookie sheets a lot, so if you're using a small puzzle, cookie sheets are great. But if you're going to be putting together a larger puzzle that has 100 pieces or 500 pieces, you want to use a bigger surface because they should be able to see all of the pieces. When you think of yourself hunched over the card table at holiday gatherings and you're trying to look at the pieces, you're not just looking at what you're working with, you're looking at all the pieces laid out on the table. So you want them to have the same opportunity. If you have the magnetic pieces over somewhere else, they still won't be able to pick them up independently. So we want to use a surface that's big enough. So vertical, like a chalkboard or wallboard, they can move their chair up to that and be able to slide the pieces around and see everything all in front of them. You can also make your own puzzles from laminated photos of friends and family. You can use cereal boxes, color copies of their favorite book pages, movie covers, whatever engages the student or the child. If you make your own, it's great if you can cut the pieces with straight edges so that it's easier for them to slide them together when they're beginning to do puzzles, or if they don't have the ability to pick the piece up and be able to hook them together. So if it has a straight edge puzzle, they can just slide them together on the magnetic field. I saw a question on the magnetic paint just pop up. Krylon has this spray paint, and you can find it at almost any craft store. Rust-Oleum has the magnetic primer that you brush on, and it's at any hardware store. Okay, and this is one that I found on Pinterest again, and I've done similar things in my classroom. A DIY magnetic playset. So they're just using lots of different cans and lids and slinkies and anything you find in your house or anything you see that your child or student is interested in. So if they're engaged by Matchbox cards but they're not able to maybe move them around, or if they're engaged with whatever you find, put a magnet on it and then you can make games out of it. They can build with it. They can attach them together. Because a lot of times we don't have that ability to play with Legos and push those things together well. Building blocks takes a lot of upper body strength and a lot of fine motor skills that our students don't always have, so it can be really frustrating. So when you play with magnets, those things just snap together. The cans are pretty magnetic. I've also found that if I cover them with magnetic paint and the primer, it makes them even more magnetic because I add extra coats. And then they just kind of jump out of their hand and snap onto the can to give them that ability to build wherever they want. If you stick on the magnets to the small parts, I would use super glue as well as the sticky that's on the back of the magnets. Gives them a stronger hold and makes the pieces last longer. So I gave you a link to just the sample one, but you can do pretty much anything with these with magnets and give our kids the ability to play with lots of different toys that would otherwise be out of reach for them. Another one is leisure activities is memory games. And lots of kids play memories. You can make your own. You can use different textures that they match, use different colors, use pictures. My students always love having pictures of each other, and they match the pictures of the classmates or the staff members Family members are always fun. I've done this with sounds for students with visual impairment. Again, I use those Hallmark cards. I'd probably keep Hallmark in business with buying all of their sound chips off their cards. But you're going to buy 2 of each card, put them on the back of pieces, they push it, and then they have to match and find the other one. I gave you a sample one from the environmental print memory game, so that just kind of gives you an idea. You can make them just on paper out of cardboard. Again, the box cardboard, just cutting up a brown box. It's easier for them to grab or pick up because it's lifted a little bit. Another thing you can do with memory games is to attach like craft pom-poms, the little tiny ones that you use for your Easter Bunny crafts. Glue those on with super glue to the edge of the memory piece, like the top, so it doesn't block the picture, and it gives them a handle to grab it or lift the pieces so that it's easier for them to manipulate. And so then bubbles and music are obvious ones that we all use. And so we want to start making that something that they can do on their own. So if they want to play with bubbles, and bubbles are okay even as an adult, but it's something that they need to be able to access. So there's switch-operated bubble machines. The one from AbleNet is great. It's very durable. It lasts forever. You can also adapt any off-the-shelf bubble machine toy with using battery interrupters or an environmental control unit. I've used some that are bath toys. A lot of the toy ones don't last as long, but if you're just wanting something that you can try with them and see if it works or if they're interested, then try some of the cheap ones. Just adapt it yourself with a battery interrupter and give them that ability to operate it with a switch. If they're able to use the ones that are for toys, especially the baby bath ones, usually have big buttons for the baby, so they may be able to use that one without switch access and just be able to blow their own bubbles. One hard part is keeping it upright. So some of the toy ones, if it gets knocked off a wheelchair tray or off a table when they're trying to access it, it will spill the bubbles. So sometimes switch may be a better option even if they could push the button, just so they don't knock it over. You can pop the bubbles with any parts of their body. This is great when you're introducing maybe a power chair or getting someone into a stander for the first time so that they're starting to reach or use parts of their body they don't always use, or so that they're motivated to move a power chair across the room and try to catch a bubble. Because a lot of times it's just boring to sit and practice not running into the wall. And so giving them those games and reasons to move it just makes it more fun. And if they can control it themselves, then it's even better. Using music, so a lot of times music is just put on for them to listen, or we connect it to a switch and they're just stuck with listening to whatever. So we want to start teaching them to pick out their own CDs and do that in a similar way that you do with the movies, having them hold the cover, look at the cover, talk about what songs are on it, give them a way to make that cover or make those choices make sense of what they want to listen to. You can adapt any switch-operated radio or cassette player with a battery interrupter. So those old Walkmans that you don't use anymore are perfect for switches because it gives them a small thing that you can use, put the battery interrupter in, and you've got a cassette player. If you're using a CD player or an MP3 player, it's harder to use with a battery interrupter or with an environmental control unit because what they do is stop power. And when you stop power to a CD player, when you restart it, it starts the disk back at the beginning and you have to hit play again to restart, which can be hard for our students to do on their own. So I found that if I use a CD player or an MP3 player with students, I actually will use a battery-powered external speaker and then have the switch power the battery-powered speaker. So it's just turning off the sound rather than turning off the CD so that when they start it again, it'll start playing again. It will skip their songs, but then if they have another way that they're able to choose which song or go back, they can push the buttons to go back in a song. You have to kind of play with those to figure out what works best for that student. There are switch accessible CD players that you can buy that are meant to be ran with a switch. They're a little more expensive. Actually, they're a lot more expensive. So you want to see if you're able to adapt what you have without needing the switch access first. The Go Talk Now app is actually fantastic to work as an MP3 player. I gave you a link to the Lite version, which is free and works as an MP3 player. You don't have as much access to the vocab for AAC use, but it works great for MP3. It'll play any music that you have loaded on your iDevice. So you can pick like maybe 6 songs or 9 songs, and it'll pull up the image of the cover, and they can make that choice right there on the screen, and they can power it that way, and you don't need a separate switch. Okay. So for building blocks, this is one that a lot of our students with multiple disabilities never get to do. They just don't have that motor skill to be able to stack and knock things down. They knock things down well. They don't have the ability to stack. They can't hold their hands open or reach out or do it steadily enough to build tall towers. So if you hang contact paper on a wall or a vertical surface with the sticky side out, they can place the blocks on the sticky paper and push it and then create their stacks. And that gives them the ability to make the same towers as their peers with their other friends. And it's right in front of them, so it's easier to see. They can arrange them. You can make patterns that they have to match and start matching the colors and the shapes. And you can build off of that, but it gives them the ability to be successful with stacking the blocks and doing the same things that their friends are doing. You could glue Velcro to any blocks and make them easy to stack together. So if you put Velcro on the ends of them or on the sides all the way around so that they can just stack them together with the rough and the soft side together, use super glue. Even if you use sticky back Velcro, I'd recommend super glue. And if they use them a lot, you will probably have to re-glue them every couple of months, but they do stick pretty well, especially with the wood blocks. Another way is to use like pipe insulation from a hardware store. And they look like the foam noodles that you would use in the pool, but it's much cheaper. You can get all kinds of different sizes. And putting Velcro on the end of the foam tubes allows you to make big tunnels and big pipes and long things that they can swing around, and the kids love them. An option for if you're having trouble with the Velcro coming off, especially if you've got a kiddo that pulls hard on them, is to sew fabric covers for your tubes or your blocks. And then you can sew the Velcro right onto the fabric, so you don't have to worry about it coming unglued. These are always a huge hit with my students. They love the Velcro blocks in the classroom, and it's usually the first toy that was always picked during their leisure time. So sensory areas, we've seen these. There's different options. They kind of look like baby gyms, but we want to focus on the sensory aspect of what they're enjoying. So this is a really great one to start when a child is really young. What is it that they like? What sounds do they like? Do they like the bells? Do they like music? Do they like things that crinkle? Do they like things that light up? Do they like things that make a different sound? Are there things they like to flip on and off or pull on? And so we want to give them an area that has those different things that they like. And you can attach them. I gave you a pattern there for making one with PVC. I also gave you a wall from Utah Assistive Technology Lab that they created for a student. It's an entire wall of things, and they used pegboard so that they can constantly be changing out the items. But you want to watch and see what it is that they prefer so you can identify similar items. If they like something of a certain texture, can you find other things to put in there? Because you want to be swapping them out. We don't want to put them in there and let them play with it and it be the exact same things for 20 years. We want to have lots of different things that they can interact with so that they can pick things that are their favorites, start making choices for what they want you to hang on it that day when they decide to play with it. Create the activity so it can grow over time. So if you find something that they really like, is there a way to make it into a doorway so that they could be in their wheelchair and use it? Can they hang it from the ceiling so that they can use it when they're in a stander? Is there a way to fasten it to a gate trainer? Is there a way to use it in the car? Can it go over their bed? Is there a way that they could have it on the wheelchair that it pivots down and comes down so that they have control over when they use it and when they don't? Things like the somatosensory bead toy, it was one of my students' favorites from Enabling Devices. We were able to find fan poles in bulk length at the hardware store and make giant walls of curtains. You can make them hang from doorways so that he gets to touch them all the time. If somebody likes something that lights up, you can add lights to those, and just lots of different things you can do with them. I find that if you go into like Pinterest or online and you just Google like sensory toys or sensory gym, there's a lot of them for babies, but it just gives you ideas of where to start and lots of things you didn't think to maybe put in there. One student of mine, her favorite thing in the entire world was a car wash mitt because it was rough and netted on one side and it was furry on the other, and she would do anything and everything to be able to play with a car wash mitt. So finding things of that similar texture for her was a highly motivating thing and gave us an area of where to go and what to find to use with her. So this one with the leisure activities is a light box. A lot of you have probably used light boxes or at least seen the light box. I gave you a couple of links there for DIY ones. Pinterest has tons of light box ideas. I gave you a link for how they made one from the imagination tree. If you look on Pinterest and just go do DIY light boxes, do light boxes for kids, you'll find lots of other DIY ideas that you can use. The ones from APH, which is the American Printing House for the Blind, are fantastic. There's two different sizes. The larger one I found has more adjustable brightness. It has a lever. It could go super bright. It can go really low if you have someone that doesn't like lots of light but wants to play with it. It also gives you more surface area to do more things on it. The mini light box, it's a little smaller. It doesn't have quite as many bells and whistles, but it fits perfectly on a wheelchair tray. So you have to kind of decide where you're going to use it, what you want it to do, how adjustable you need the different areas to be. If you have students who have a visual impairment in your class, or if your child has a visual impairment, if your child has cortical visual impairment, they likely can get a light box through their federal quota. So if you have a visual impairment teacher that works with you, talk to them about it and see if they can get you a light box from APH so you don't have to buy one. And then you can even use it in the summers, take it home, talk to them about what your child's eligible for. I will say that the light box was one of my most used tools in my classroom, so it was definitely something that's worth paying the price for. They last a really long time. They're pretty resistant to routine abuse. They've been knocked over, beat on, and I've never had any problems with them. They also are very good about repairing their items that you buy. So I gave you some links to lots of different ideas to use the light box. There's tons of ideas, and they're geared toward those with visual impairments, and especially cortical visual impairment, which we see a lot with students with multiple disabilities, especially those with cerebral palsy. But they're also perfect for a lot of students that have multiple disabilities. And I've found that the light box is something that gets students' attention. It gets my kids to look at something that maybe they didn't before. So if I have a student that I'm trying to get them to do a board game and they're kind of just off staring at the light, or they're staring at something else, if I copy the board game or whatever I want them to look at onto those clear transparency papers from like back in the olden days when we had overhead projectors, I run that through as a color copy onto transparency paper, and then I can put it onto the light box. And the student is engaged. They're looking at it because there's a light there, because it's something interesting and new for them to look at. I had one student at one point that we were trying really hard to get to use a communication device, and he just wouldn't focus on him. I knew he had a visual impairment. So we ran off some colored copies onto the transparency paper. We put them on the light box, and we ended up having to later modify the light box into a communication device, again using Hallmark card little recording things to use as the communication. But it was the one thing that would engage him, and it turned out he really couldn't see the items on the other devices until we lit them up brightly. So it's something to play with to see if light is the way that you can get somebody to focus on something. Or maybe there's a visual impairment that you weren't aware of that you can see when you're testing them on the light box. So that's one that gets people looking at things. Lots and lots of things you can do with the light box. Once you get into that website and the Texas School for the Blind, you'll kind of get in there and then you'll never leave. So it's one of those websites that will suck you in with ideas and things to try. So some additional ideas and resources. Pinterest is fantastic. I don't know how I taught all these years before Pinterest came along, but start searching for things for multiple disabilities, search for things for light box, search for sensory boxes. Just anything that you have, put in a search for that and as an activity, and you'll probably find somebody that's pinned something that will give you an idea of where to go with that. I gave you a link to my Pinterest boards. Anything that says COT in the title has objects and activities and things that would be related to multiple disabilities. So if you wanted to start there, and then when you see where the pins came from, that may give you a starting point for where else to look. Texas School for the Blind, again, has lots and lots of ideas for creating educational toys and activities, lots of ideas for different toys that you might want to use. And most of their ideas for cortical visual impairment also work fantastically for students with multiple disabilities. Perkins Learning website has lots and lots of ideas, different places to get you started, and we'll send you to different resources. Also, I find that most of the things that I made, getting them, just going through catalogs like AbleNet, Enabling Devices, Don Johnston, SNS Therapy, those are some of my favorites. I would get ideas from things that they had and then figure out a way to make my own version or a way that I could use something similar for a student. So those are just the ways to get started. So those will give you just some ideas for starting points, and once you get into those websites, they usually lead you in good places. If you have other questions or want other resources, always feel free to email me, send me a tweet. My website has lots and lots of activities. I have lots of BoardMaker device things ready to go on there already, lots of file folder activities and things geared toward multiple disabilities. So you might check out the teacher materials on that to get you started as well. So I can take some questions here. Let's see. So it's about to comment, students do respond to light even if they do not have visual impairment, which is definitely true. Most of my students love things with lights on them. That's definitely a way to get them to focus on something, to pay attention to something. They're very stimulated by light. Students who mouth almost all toys. I have a lot of those. making sure that we're gluing things on really, really well, so that we, especially checking the Velcro, if you are using Velcro or you're using magnets, check them every single time you're using it to make sure that it's still glued on well. You may want to redo it every month anyways, just to recheck. Covering things with plastic. A lot of the things can be put in the mouth if it's not small parts. You just want to make sure you clean it well afterwards. I always buy things with surfaces that I know I can bleach and I can disinfect after every use. So just kind of adapting those. The board games, if you're using the copies and they're laminated, different ways like that, are ways that they can still put things in their mouth. They can put books in their mouth if you've laminated the magazine pages. That was how I started laminating magazine pages, was because I had a student that would chew on the pages but really wanted to read magazines. And then it turned out that the other students were able to turn the pages better. So it just kind of grew from there. But a lot of things can go in the mouth and it's okay. So we just have to be ready to disinfect them. Let me see if I see other questions here. I think I see, I've got most of them. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat box there. Paint that recommend for students. I use for students that mouth objects for planning when I paint over things. I buy the Rust-Oleum has a plastic spray paint. It's meant for outdoor toys. It's a latex paint, and it creates like a plastic film over it, kind of like what you would have if you bought a plastic lawn chair. And it makes everything waterproof, disinfectable, cleanable, scrubbable, mouthable. And I use that a lot when I find toys that I like that maybe have baby things on it. I would spray paint over them to use in my high school classroom. And that was my favorite. And Rust-Oleum paint lasts forever, and it's really easy to apply. It usually only takes 1 or 2 coats. So that's my favorite. But any of the plastic type spray paints are great. I would use a latex because it's water-based and easier to clean up and to deal with. But let's see if I got another one here. If I could recap on watching TV with the end goals in adulthood. For watching TV, I know it's a skill that we just don't even really think about, but it's something that is a realistic adult behavior. We want them to be able to pick out their own shows. So we work through the different steps of learning to identify a movie case that goes with different scenes of movies, talking about the movies as you're going through them so that they begin to identify what I'm seeing on the screen relates to this picture. And that takes you through those steps of getting to picture symbols and making choices based on something that's not actually there. And movies are very abstract. When we think that they're making a choice between 2 movies, they're picking between 2 movies that we've already picked, and they really probably don't care which one because we usually give them 2 choices of their favorites. So teaching them how to make that choice and what things to look at on that case and to figure out about a TV show. So I used to be completely against baby toys used with adults, but I learned that by adapting them or maybe using them at home, a lot of them we can make more age appropriate just by covering up the baby symbols on them. Or if it is the baby symbol, if they are obsessed with Sesame Street, that's okay. Can we find a way to make it smaller and put it on something else that they enjoy? Ways to make it more appropriate so it just doesn't draw attention. And then if they're with friends and they're accepting, that's totally fine. My thing when I teach high school is that I don't want other peers to walk in the room and see baby toys because I don't want them to treat my students like babies. I want them to see them as peers. So I found that by putting things in containers that you couldn't see through and playing with them in times when the other peers were in the room was a better way to just create that social engagement so that the other students didn't feel uncomfortable or feel like they had to help the students with a disability or like they had to be the big brother, big sister type of relationship. Patricia asked if I have a list of good age-appropriate apps. I do have some of those. I'm going to be doing more in the next 2 webinars with using switches and using AAC apps and some technology. So I'll talk more about that kind of thing in those webinars. But if you send me an email, I can share with you a couple of the documents I have related to using just things with older students as well. Let's see if I see any more questions here. Somebody asked about the Rust-Oleum paint and then covering with waterproof spray paint. If you use the Rust-Oleum plastic paint, you won't need to cover with waterproof spray paint. The waterproof spray paint, I haven't had a lot of luck with, but using the Rust-Oleum latex-based paint and the plastic paint will give you a waterproof finish without having to do anything. And someone asked about some eye gaze. Using eye gaze, I use a lot of that just with the making the choices. You're just going to, again, putting it up in front of them, games in front of them. They can tell you where to move their piece by using their eyes as long as it's flat and in front of their face. Just giving them those options and those choices presented visually in front and then waiting for that use or for that response. Let's see. I think I got, so far, all the ones I'm seeing. Nancy, I think they'll be emailing that out to you tomorrow or the next day. The next 2 webinars are in August, and I probably should know those dates off the top of my head. I can't remember. But Kristen will send that stuff out, but it's on the AbleNet website. Yep. The next one will be on using switches, not for the sake of using switches, so actually appropriate use. And then the one after that will be focusing on communication in social and leisure activities and purposeful use of it. Okay, any other questions? Looks like we're winding down. Lisa, on the flashlight game, it's a process. So we started out with just working on using the flashlight, steering it, pointing at different things in the classroom. So then we would start pointing to objects that they knew that they wanted or that were familiar to them. So can you find so-and-so in the classroom? Can you find your favorite block? Can you find your favorite toys? And having them point to those different objects with the flashlight so that they slowly started to realize that when I point to something, I can find it over there even if it's not right in front of me. And then we would say, have someone go out in the hallway maybe and then say, can you point to where they went? And they would point to the doorway. So it starts to realize that that person's out there and they can use that to communicate a message. So it's a step-by-step. It takes a long time to get there. It wasn't something we could just do the first day. It really would build over even several years to be able to do that. Shannon, battery interrupters you can buy. AbleNet has them. Enabling Devices has them. Pretty much anywhere that they sell any assistive technology, you can make your own. I'm really good at soldering my fingers together, so I just buy them. It's so much easier. But anywhere that has assistive technology devices basically have the same types of battery interrupters. Some of the whiteboards are magnetic, not every dry erase board. A lot of the lap boards and things you would buy at the store to use with kids are not magnetic, but others are, so you'll have to make sure that it's magnetic. Or if you're making your own just for the sake of being magnetic, you can use that magnetic paint, put several layers of that primer on it, and then paint it with whiteboard paint if you want it to be a whiteboard, or just use the magnetic surface. So you can make your own. You can paint a whole wall with magnetic paint. Okay, it looks like we're about wrapping up with questions. Feel free to email or tweet if you have other questions or would like additional resources or want me to clarify anything. And it looks like Kristen will send out the webinar notes. You should have got an email with the slideshow attached, and if you need any other information. And it will also have the dates for my upcoming webinars that are on the AbleNet website. Okay, I think if there's no more questions, I think we're finished for tonight. Thank you all for coming. This is my first webinar, so it looks like I didn't break the internet, so that's a great start. And I appreciate all of your feedback and questions, and hope to see you at my next webinar. Have a great night.